poor family inherited Kenny Rogers' abandoned mansion, thinking they would simply clean it up and start a new life. But when they discovered a hidden underground vault holding more than $200 million, dangerous people came knocking, ready to do anything to take that fortune back. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. Dawn rarely brought comfort to the Robinson family. Morning only meant that the exhaustion they had put aside for a few hours of restless sleep returned to claim them again. On the outskirts of Atlanta, in a rundown two-bedroom duplex that smelled faintly of damp drywall and old cooking oil, life was a constant negotiation with despair. The rent was 3 months late. The power company sent warning notes printed in bold red letters that piled up on the small, wobbly table in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed in a tired, inconsistent way, as if even the appliance knew it wasn't sure how long it would keep going under these conditions. It was a house where dreams had to be quiet so they wouldn't wake the hungry reality sleeping beside them. David Robinson sat on the edge of the sagging couch, tying the laces of his worn steel-toe boots. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the ache that had settled deep into his bones years ago and refused to leave. His back still burned from the previous night's shift at the shipping docks. Hours of lifting crates heavier than any human should reasonably be expected to lift had carved invisible trenches across his muscles. Every day the pain screamed louder, and every day he did his best to ignore it. He didn't have the luxury of a doctor's visit. Health insurance, in his world, was a fairy tale as distant as winning the lottery or finding a pot of gold at the end of some non-existent rainbow. Behind him, a small voice broke through his thoughts. "Daddy, are we going to have pancakes today?" That was little Eli, all big hopeful eyes and wild curls, standing barefoot in pajamas with superheroes printed so faded they were barely visible. David's heart clenched. 5-year-olds weren't supposed to worry about money, or electricity, or whether the kitchen cabinets held anything more than canned beans and stale crackers. He forced a smile and scooped the boy up, ignoring the spike of pain shooting through his lower back. "We'll see, champ," he whispered into Eli's ear, breathing in the warm scent of sleep still clinging to his son. "Maybe tomorrow, or this weekend. Daddy just needs to work a little more." Eli nodded solemnly, the way only children who had learned too early to accept disappointment could. "Okay." In the tiny bedroom across the hall, 13-year-old Marie stood in front of the cracked mirror, twisting the same lock of hair over and over again. She didn't say it aloud, but she hated her hand-me-down jeans. They were too short now, exposing her ankles in a way that made some kids at school point and laugh. She tried to remind herself that clothes didn't define her. She tried to remember her dream of becoming a doctor, helping people who couldn't afford help. But it was hard to feel like you could save the world when you couldn't even blend in with it. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Jaden sat on the floor beside the bunk bed, tuning his old guitar. Its body scratched and chipped, a few stickers half peeled away from the surface. He played the same few chords again and again, his fingers moving without hesitation. Music was more than a hobby. It was breath, escape, possibility. When he closed his eyes while playing, he could almost believe he'd someday hear applause instead of his mother's tired sighs or the landlord pounding on the door. In the kitchen, Linda Robinson was already dressed in her faded housekeeping uniform, dark circles under her eyes like bruises left by stress instead of fists. Her hands bore signs of her work, small burns from industrial cleaners, redness around the knuckles where the chemicals had seeped through cheap gloves. She opened the refrigerator and stared inside, counting items in the same way a general counts soldiers before a hopeless battle. A carton of eggs with only 2 left, half a gallon of milk that was stretching longer than any liquid should, and a jar of peanut butter scraped nearly clean. She turned as David entered the kitchen. He kissed her forehead, smelling the faint trace of lemon cleaner lingering on her skin. "Mornin'," he murmured. "Morning," she replied, forcing brightness into her tone, but failing to hide the worry clouding her eyes. He lowered his voice. "Power bill is still unpaid. They'll cut us again if we don't get something to them next week." "I know." She reached for her purse, which sagged with old receipts but very little money. "I picked up an extra shift tonight. Maybe that'll help." "You already work too much." "We both do." The truth sat between them like a silent, suffocating presence. Their love was strong, but even strong love could fray when constantly stretched by poverty. They rarely fought, but when they did, it was always late at night, when exhaustion stripped away patience and fear took over. They would try to keep their voices low, not wanting the children to hear, but walls that thin didn't know how to keep secrets. The kids always heard the apologies, the trembling breaths, the promises that things would get better somehow, someday, even though that day never seemed to get any closer. David checked his phone for the time and sighed. "I need to go if I want to catch the early bus." "I'll walk you out," Linda said automatically. They always saw each other off when they could. It was a small ritual of unity against the world's chaos. As David stepped outside, he shivered slightly. The morning air was cold, biting through his thin jacket. Their neighborhood wasn't dangerous by reputation, but desperation made its own kind of threat. A few houses away, a man sat on his porch with a cigarette dangling from his lips, staring blankly into nothing. Another young man hurried down the sidewalk, hood up, avoiding eye contact. Life here didn't make space for friendliness. Survival demanded caution. Linda returned to the kitchen to gather the kids. They emerged one by one, each carrying the invisible weight of their own private worries. Marie tugged at her too short jeans and tried to smile. Eli clung to a stuffed bear that had lost an ear long ago. Jaden, always trying to seem older than 16, slung his guitar case over his shoulder. They walked to the bus stop together. On the way, Marie asked in a small voice, "Mom, can I go on the science field trip next month? It's only $10, and we're learning about the human body, and—" Linda's heart cracked. $10 might as well have been 1,000. "We'll see," she answered carefully, but Marie lowered her head, knowing what that really meant. Jaden walked a little ahead, pretending he wasn't listening, though he heard every word. He hated how his siblings' dreams were always being postponed. He hated that his own talent felt like a burden, one more thing they couldn't afford to nurture. At the corner, the city bus screeched to a stop. Linda kissed each of them quickly before they climbed aboard. She stayed behind, heading in the opposite direction toward the hotel, where she would clean rooms for guests who would never know her name. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who lived life in schedules and shifts, not in freedoms and choices. Hours later, after her shift ended and exhaustion dragged at her heels, she climbed the stairs to their duplex and paused when she saw something taped to the door. A cream-colored envelope, thick and official-looking, sealed tight. Her heart lurched. Eviction notice? Another demand for money she no longer had? Her fingers shook as she tore the envelope open. Inside, on heavy paper embossed with gold lettering, were words that didn't make sense at first. Her breath caught as she reread them. "Dear Mrs. Linda Robinson." We represent the estate of Miss Marilyn Brown, deceased, who named you as her sole beneficiary." The letter went on, but her focus tunneled in on a single sentence. "You have inherited real property located in Fitzgerald, Georgia, previously owned by Mr. Kenny Rogers and transferred to Miss Brown prior to his passing. A mansion. Land. An inheritance she never asked for, never expected, never dared imagine." Her entire body felt suspended in a moment between disbelief and terror. She didn't know Marilyn Brown. She didn't understand why someone who shared her last name only as a distant fate would leave her anything. She sank onto the couch, letter clutched to her chest when the door opened and the children burst inside, dropping backpacks and chattering all at once. They fell silent when they saw her face. "What's wrong?" Jaden asked, his voice edged with fear. Linda held out the letter and the kids gathered close. Little Eli couldn't read well yet, but he saw the words inherit and property and gasped, "Mommy, are we rich now?" Linda shook her head slowly. "I don't know what we are." Marie's brows drew together. "Who's Marilyn Brown? Is she family?" "I think so. Maybe distant." Linda swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "I barely knew any relatives growing up. My parents never talked about them." Jaden stared at the letter, skepticism battling hope. "Is this real?" "I think it is." The weight of possibility felt too heavy for her trembling hands. "I'll call the number tomorrow." As night fell, the small home seemed to shrink around them under the magnitude of that white envelope. The children lay awake, whispering about what life might soon look like: new clothes, a house with a yard, enough food. Dreams didn't feel so dangerous tonight. But Linda and David, lying side by side in the darkness, did not sleep easily. Anything too good to be true usually was. Poverty had taught them that, yet there was a flicker inside both of them, small and fragile, that felt like hope awakening after years of forced silence. And outside, a man sat in a parked car with engine off and windows dark, watching their house with a patience born not of hope, but hunger. He held a small piece of the torn envelope he had retrieved from their trash earlier and turned it over in his fingers like a clue. His gaze sharpened. "Oh, yes," he whispered to no one, a predatory smile curling at his lips. "They'll lead me right to it." The Robinsons had no idea that their lives were being observed, no idea that their inheritance wasn't a blessing everyone wanted them to have. They slept in a fragile cocoon of uncertain optimism, unaware that some fortunes were protected by secrets, and that secrets often came with danger. The clock ticked past midnight, and the city breathed on, unaware that somewhere in a cramped duplex, the first domino had fallen in a story far larger than the family who had just become its center. Their world was already changing. They just didn't know how much yet. The letter lay on the table, illuminated by the flicker of a dying kitchen bulb, the beginning of an impossible path. Tomorrow they would start walking it. The next morning arrived not with calm anticipation, but with nervous urgency. The letter lay on the kitchen table like a lit fuse waiting to reach the flame. Linda sat beside David, phone pressed against her ear, her hand trembling as she spoke to the attorney whose name was printed in elegant cursive on that heavy envelope. Her voice attempted a confident steadiness while her insides churned with disbelief. Yes, that's my name," she repeated, answering questions to confirm her identity. "Yes, we received the letter. We never expected anything like this." David watched her, elbows on the table, fingers tapping anxiously. He had woken before the sun, unable to sleep through the pounding worry and excitement battling in his mind. He studied her expression, searching for answers in every subtle change in her features. Finally, Linda nodded slowly to whatever was being said on the other side of the line. "Yes, we will come. Tomorrow. Thank you." She hung up but didn't move. Her stare remained fixed on the blank wall like she was seeing a future she didn't yet know how to touch. "What did he say?" David asked, almost afraid to break the silence. "We need to come to Fitzgerald, to sign papers, to see the property." Her voice was soft, fragile with awe. David leaned back in his chair, rubbing both hands over his face. "It's real." "It's real," she echoed, but her voice wavered, as if she feared that if she spoke too confidently, the opportunity might vanish like breath on a mirror. The children, gathered nearby in half-hidden eavesdropping positions, erupted into excited chatter. Eli jumped up and down, cheering like someone had promised him all the candy in the world. Marie clasped her hands over her mouth, tears flooding her eyes at the possibility of relief from constant humiliation. Even Jaden, who guarded his emotions like a vault, let a full smile crack through his usual cool facade. Today, optimism had teeth. It could bite into real change. What none of them knew was that the man who had been keeping watch returned again that morning, seeing their jubilation through the window before he drove away. He had a direction now. All he needed was patience. Packing was easy because there wasn't much to pack. A few bags with clothes, some personal items, Jaden's guitar carefully wrapped in an old sweatshirt. Linda double-checked every burner on the stove before they left, even though there was barely anything left to cook with. Locking the door of the duplex didn't feel like a safeguard anymore. It felt like a goodbye. Their old van rattled as it pulled out of the neighborhood. Houses covered in chipped paint and sagging roofs faded behind them, replaced by stretches of highway that carved through towering pines. The deeper they went into Georgia, the more the world seemed to widen, as if something had been holding its breath until their arrival. The children pressed their faces to the windows. Even David, fighting fatigue, found himself occasionally glancing out with a wonder he hadn't felt since he was young enough to believe dreams didn't require permission. "Do you think it's really big?" Eli asked from his booster seat. "Like in movies?" David kept his eyes on the road. "I don't know, Bud, but we're about to find out." He didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep. Poverty taught caution, but even he couldn't suppress the thrill pulsing through his veins. After hours of driving, the GPS instructed them onto a long road flanked by tall trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches in narrow beams, turning everything into a painting. Too beautiful and too quiet, the air changed, smelling of earth and old history. No trespassing signs peppered the edges of the forest, and the narrow road suddenly widened before a tall wrought iron gate. Despite rust creeping along its bars, the gate still held an intimidating dignity. Vines had begun reclaiming what once belonged to human hands, wrapping the metal in nature's patient grip. "This is it," Linda whispered. David got out to push the gate. It groaned like a beast awakened from a long sleep, scraping across the ground before reluctantly allowing them entry. With every inch they rolled forward, uneasiness crept onto their skin. The estate was silent, but not peaceful, more like a place waiting for something to happen. Then the trees parted. The house revealed itself. The mansion wasn't simply large, it was immense, sprawling across the land with wide arms of stone and wood. The architecture blended southern charm with an older, stately grandeur, but time had claimed its share. The once shining white paint had faded, peeling away like old memories. Windows, many shattered, reflected fractured pieces of daylight. A balcony sagged on one side, and dead leaves blanketed a fountain that hadn't flowed in years. It looked like royalty, abandoned and left to rot. "Whoa," Jaden muttered, stunned. His eyes drank in every detail. "This belonged to Kenny Rogers?" "That's what they said," David replied, killing the engine. The van shuddered as if relieved to rest from the long journey. Eli grabbed his hand, suddenly less brave. "It's kind of scary." "It's just old," David said softly, lifting him into his arms. But even he felt the chill of the place, the sensation that someone or something was still watching them. The air inside was thick with dust and shadows as they pushed through the heavy front door. The foyer opened wide like the mouth of a giant cavern. A once grand chandelier hung crookedly above them, its crystals dulled by grime. Large sheets covered ornate furniture, ghostly shapes looming in dim corners. Floorboards creaked under their weight, complaining loudly after years with no footsteps. Marie clung to Linda's arm. "Are we sure we can stay here?" Linda placed a comforting hand on her daughter's back. "We're not staying. At least, not yet. We're just exploring." Jaden didn't wait for more reassurance. He moved ahead, drawn by curiosity and a flicker of adventure. A pair of portraits hung on the wall of a large parlor, one unmistakably of Kenny Rogers with his guitar in hand, smiling like a man who had sung his way through the world. The other of a woman whose dark skin seemed to glow against the painted background. She wore a simple dress, eyes filled with quiet strength. The name beneath the portrait read, Marilyn Brown, estate manager. Linda stared at the portrait with a tightening throat. It was like looking at a stranger who somehow felt like family. The letter had said Marilyn was her relative, but seeing her here, next to one of the most famous musicians in America, brought a wave of questions crashing through her. How did she get here? Why didn't I know her? The whispers of her thoughts felt loud in the silence of the room. David, while examining an old piano, lifted the cover to reveal keys yellowed by years. He pressed one. A faint, ghostly note echoed, as if the house remembered music and missed it dearly. Then, something shifted upstairs. A soft thump, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. The whole family froze. David raised his eyes toward the grand staircase. Dust drifted from the banister as though something had brushed past it moments earlier. He felt Eli's small fingers tighten around his shirt. "It's probably just the house settling," Linda said, too quickly to sound convinced. But the silence that followed didn't settle. It thickened around them like fog. Trying to shake off the tension, Linda moved into what appeared to be a study. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, their shelves sagging under the weight of leather-bound volumes. She noticed an envelope placed neatly atop a desk, untouched by dust. With hesitant fingers, she lifted it, recognizing the elegant handwriting on the front, Linda Robinson. Her heart began pounding again as she unfolded the letter inside. A short message, written in looping script. "My dearest family, if you are reading this, then I am gone. You have been given not just a home, but a truth tied to every brick and note within these walls. Seek where the music never rested. There, you will find your freedom. With love beyond distance. Marilyn." The words trembled in her hands as if infused with something more than ink. She stared at the signature, feeling a connection she had never known she needed. "What does it say?" David asked. She read it aloud. When she reached the line about music, Jaden's head snapped up instantly, drawn like a magnet to the one thing that defined him. "The music never rested," he repeated thoughtfully. "That sounds like a studio. David nodded. That makes sense. Someone like Kenny Rogers had to have a recording studio in his home. Before anyone could respond, a sudden gust slammed a door somewhere upstairs. Eli screamed, burying his face in David's shoulder. David didn't show his fear, but every instinct warned him this house was not simply old. It held secrets with teeth. Linda forced herself to stand tall, slipping the letter carefully into her purse. She took a breath that tasted of dust and old wood. We should finish looking around. There's an attorney expecting us tomorrow. We need to know what we're dealing with. David agreed silently, though unease continued to crawl under his skin. As they moved deeper into the shadow-laced rooms, one by one, something watched them from an upper window. A silhouette lingered just long enough before retreating into darkness. Downstairs, Linda tried to hide her anxiety, ushering her children ahead cautiously. Jaden lingered near the portraits again, his gaze returning to Marilyn's painted eyes, as if expecting her to speak. He jotted the words from the letter into the back of his mind like a clue in a treasure hunt, where the music never rested. Outside, wind brushed against the house, making the cracked shutters groan. The Robinsons explored, unaware that the place they now stepped into wasn't simply inheriting them, it was claiming them. Every step they took stirred the dust of stories long buried beneath fame, loyalty, and something darker. The mansion was full of silence, but not the empty kind. It was a silence holding its breath. And when the Robinsons left that evening, planning to return the next day to tour the property more thoroughly with the attorney, the house seemed to watch them go. David locked the gate behind them, though he couldn't explain why he felt like the place needed to be kept inside rather than intruders kept out. None of them noticed a figure step out from behind the trees after the van disappeared from sight. He studied the house, then glanced at the road where the Robinsons had just been. Almost there, he muttered. Tomorrow we'll see what's really inside. The gate creaked in the wind, as though responding to him. Night crept over the long driveway, swallowing the path the Robinsons had taken. Tomorrow they would return to the abandoned palace, and tomorrow the secrets hiding in its walls would begin to emerge, one note at a time. The mansion waited, knowing its silence would not hold much longer. The next morning, dawn painted the sky in a shade of pale peach, as though the world hesitated before revealing the truth buried in the bones of the estate they were about to explore again. The Robinsons woke early in the cheap motel room they had rented for the night, the air heavy with anticipation. Despite the firm mattress and scratchy sheets, none of them had slept particularly well. The mansion had followed them into their dreams, filling sleep with long hallways, creaking staircases, and a mysterious letter hinting at secrets waiting to be uncovered beneath the surface of its decay. Linda stood at the small sink, splashing cold water onto her face. She stared into the mirror, searching for a reflection that made sense with what her life had suddenly become. Yesterday, she was a tired mother fighting for survival, scraping together coins to pay for Eli's cereal and Marie's school field trips. Today, she was the heir to a property worth who knew what. It felt unreal, like slipping from one world into another overnight, with no warning or preparation. The world inside that mansion was nothing like hers, and she feared what might be required of her to belong to it. Meanwhile, David sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing the back of his neck as he stared at the sleeping children. He had insisted they get as much rest as possible, though he knew excitement was sharper than caffeine in their young veins. Even Jaden, usually too cool to show enthusiasm, had struggled to fall asleep, his imagination alight with possibilities. a musician inheriting a house once owned by a music legend. It felt like fate was whispering something directly to him. Marie blinked awake and stretched, tugging the blanket up for a moment of warmth before sitting up. "Mom," she asked softly, "do you think we'll get lost in the house today?" Linda smiled faintly. "Not if we stay together." Eli popped his head up from the pillow, hair in a chaotic tangle. "Is today when we find the music room?" His small voice trembled between fear and wonder. David chuckled, though tension remained beneath the sound. "If there is one, we'll find it." By mid-morning, they were driving again along the narrow forest path, their van crunching over gravel. The gate loomed ahead as they approached, and once more David climbed out to push it open. The house, awakened by yesterday's footsteps, stood like a silent judge waiting to see if they were worthy of stepping inside again. The attorney was already waiting for them on the porch. He was a tall, fit man with gray streaks in his hair and an expensive suit that looked wildly out of place against the peeling paint and cracked columns of the mansion. He introduced himself as Richard Gallman, his handshake firm but formal. "You must be Mrs. Robinson," he said, offering Linda a polite smile. This house belonged to Miss Marilyn Brown, who was both a trusted advisor and dear friend of Mr. Rogers. She had no children, no immediate family, except, as we discovered in recent genealogical tracebacks, for you. Linda blinked, overwhelmed by the weight of belonging that she had never known existed. "I wish I had known her," she murmured. Gallman nodded gently. She wished that too. They walked through the entry hall again, the attorney pointing out parts of the house as he would any property. Roof repairs needed, faulty wiring, rooms that could one day shine again with proper restoration. The practicalities grounded the atmosphere, easing some of the supernatural tension that had clung to them yesterday. But that sense of being watched didn't quite disappear. The mansion's walls seemed to listen. Jaden stepped into the parlor once more, drawn again to the portraits. Richard noticed his interest and offered more context, explaining how Marilyn oversaw nearly every detail of Kenny Rogers' life offstage. Finances, travel, estate planning. "She was the reason the house stayed running," he said. "Kenny always said she was the heart behind the music." Linda listened carefully, her eyes drifting again to Marilyn's painted gaze. Somehow she felt the woman was still watching over her, guiding her deeper into what she was meant to discover. Richard excused himself to make a call, leaving the family alone. David's curiosity, mixed with a newfound sense of purpose, took control as he waved for the children to follow him through the halls. They passed through rooms suspended in time. A dining room with a long table still decorated with dusty crystal vases, a library filled with aging books, a ballroom with scuffed floors that once must have gleamed under the spin of dancers and the resonance of laughter. Marie wrinkled her nose. "It smells like old people and spiders." David ruffled her hair. "It's a big house. Big houses hold a lot of old stories." He didn't mention the growing sensation crawling up his spine. Jaden, wandering near the study where Linda had found the envelope yesterday, paused beside a set of double doors. His fingers skimmed the worn brass handles before he pushed them open. Beyond lay a space unlike the others, a recording studio. Even neglected, even covered in dust, it was breathtaking. The walls were padded with soundproofing panels, and an entire mixing console stretched across one end, rows of buttons, sliders, and knobs that once controlled music known around the world. A glass partition revealed the booth where voices and instruments were immortalized. Instruments still lingered here, a drum set waiting for a beat, a keyboard resting silent, and on the wall several guitars hung like dear friends frozen in time. Jaden took one step inside, then another, barely breathing. It felt like stepping into a sacred temple built from rhythm and heart. He gently touched the keys of the keyboard. A soft chime rang out, though no power should have connected to the instrument. He backed up suddenly, startled. "Did you hear that?" David was about to respond when a crackle erupted from the speakers overhead, followed by a deep, warm voice, Kenny Rogers' voice, singing a faint note from one of his iconic songs. It ended almost as soon as it began, leaving silence echoing like an unfinished phrase. The family exchanged wide-eyed glances, confusion and awe mingling with fear. Jaden's excitement overcame hesitation. He scanned the studio, running his hand along the massive mixing board, fingers trailing the dust. As he moved, he noticed something curious. A seam in the wall near the guitars, barely visible, like a door disguised within acoustic padding. "What's that?" he asked, leaning closer. He pressed lightly against the wall and felt a soft give. David joined him, examining the inconspicuous panel. There was a single button tucked beneath a flap of fabric. Small, round, and marked with words dulled by age, but still readable, "Keep the music alive." The phrase from Marilyn's letter. Linda's breath caught. "I think she meant this room?" Jaden didn't wait. He pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan like a sleeping giant roused from decades of slumber, the wall split at its seam and slid open to reveal a narrow metal elevator, dim lights flickering to life along the interior. Marie took a step back. "No way I'm going down there." "It's probably safe," David said, peering inside, though he wasn't entirely convinced. But this house was his now. This inheritance wasn't something he could shy away from. He needed to understand what came with it. The family stepped in, Linda clutching Eli close, the elevator door shut, sealing them in darkness for a few seconds before a faint light glowed overhead. A soft hum began, and the lift descended slowly into the belly of the mansion. As they moved downward, a strange sound floated around them. Not mechanical, not electrical. Music. Soft, distant, like a lullaby sung by the house itself. Notes of a guitar wove through the air, followed by a whisper of melody. Kenny's voice again, faint and hauntingly beautiful. When the elevator stopped, the doors slid open with a hiss. The chamber before them looked like a vault of memories. Tall, rolling shelves filled with tapes, vinyl records, and countless documents stretched across the room. Spotlights flickered on overhead, illuminating plaques of gold and platinum records lining the walls. A glass case housed a guitar with the initials KR carefully engraved near the neck. Linda stepped forward first, overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. Here was legacy, not just of a music icon, but of the woman who had chosen her and trusted her. Marilyn had built something here, hidden it under layers of fame and secrecy, waiting for family to claim it. And Linda was that family. A tear slipped down her cheek before she wiped it away quickly, not wanting the children to think she was frightened. But fear did lurk beneath her awe. Fear of the unknown, and fear that they were now part of something much larger than themselves. David found a series of shelves marked with Marilyn's name. He brushed aside dust to reveal files neatly labeled, investments and assets documented, proof of hidden wealth accumulated over years of trust and partnership. This was no mere assistant. Marilyn had been a cornerstone of this empire. He whispered under his breath, "Why us? Why now?" Marie tugged on Linda's sleeve. "Mom, can we go back up now?" Before Linda could answer, a clattering noise slammed through the silence, sharp and metallic. The elevator door had shut itself. Then came the louder slam above them, echoing down the shaft. Something had sealed the elevator entrance. David ran to the door, slapping his palm against the panel. "Hey, open!" But the lift remained motionless. The air tightened in their lungs as they realized they were trapped. Jaden swallowed hard, pulling his siblings close. His excitement dissolved into dread. Linda reached for David's hand, squeezing tightly. The chamber felt colder now, the lights flickering like nervous heartbeats. The music that once felt like a welcome now sounded like a warning. "They wanted us to find this," she whispered, "but someone doesn't want us to leave." Above them, in the house they had dared to explore, silence grew teeth again. And down below, surrounded by treasure that could change their lives forever, the Robinson family stood together, breathless, frightened, and unaware that this discovery was the first step into a truth that could protect them or destroy them. They were not alone in the mansion, and now whoever else was there knew exactly where to find them. The silence in the underground chamber stretched, thick and suffocating, wrapping around the Robinsons like invisible hands. The elevator's loud slam still echoed in their minds, an undeniable message that whatever force guided the mansion's secrets had turned the page, and now they were inside the story whether they wanted to be or not. The air was cool and dry, preserved by climate control systems that should not have worked after years of abandonment. Somewhere, deeper in the vault, a quiet mechanical hum persisted, like a heartbeat in the walls. David stepped closer to the elevator door and pressed the buttons repeatedly, hoping friction and persistence might ignite a response. Nothing happened. His palm hovered a moment longer over the panel before his hand dropped slowly. He inhaled and straightened, trying to gather courage, trying to be the calm their children needed. But inside, he felt a heavy dread crawl up his spine and lodge itself behind his ribs. Eli clung to Linda's arm, burying his face against her jacket. Marie stood stiff beside her mother, wide-eyed, trying not to show fear in front of her brothers. Jaden shifted anxiously, scanning the room, his heart pounding wildly. Despite everything, despite the supernatural music and the shutting doors, a small spark of awe and curiosity flickered within him. A secret vault beneath a music legend's estate wasn't something he could have imagined even in wild dreams. Linda realized her breath was trembling and forced herself to inhale slowly through her nose. She reminded herself that panic was a luxury they could not afford. "It's okay," she whispered, even if she wasn't sure she believed it. "We're together. We'll figure this out." David nodded, grateful for Linda's voice drawing him back to the ground. He turned toward the shelves and walls around them, realizing that if they were going to be stuck here for a while, the best move was to explore, to search for answers or a way out. The vault wasn't a prison. It was built with intention. Marilyn must have used it herself, which meant there had to be another way out. No one would build a room like this with only one exit. With shaky steps, Marie moved to a glass case holding the guitar engraved with KR. The initials glinted under the weak overhead lights. She raised her fingers just shy of touching the glass and looked back at her parents. "This isn't just some old stuff," she murmured. "This is history." David smiled sadly. "It is, and you're right to respect it." Jaden gravitated to a wall of tapes drawn by labels handwritten in elegant script. Studio Sessions, Sundan, 1984, Duets, 1979-1991, and stranger ones like Personal Recordings, Keep Private. His fingertips tingled as he traced the spines of each tape, like they contained not just sound, but emotion, pain, victories. He imagined Kenny Rogers, decades of creation poured into these little spools of magnetic tape, now hidden away and trusted to someone who wasn't even born during their inception. Linda turned toward a different set of shelves. These appeared newer, with binders labeled in neat printed fonts. Financial records, investments, assets, property, legal, last wills, and contracts. Her pulse quickened. "David," she called softly, "I think I found something." He joined her, scanning the labels. Even without opening them, he could guess what lay inside. The truth behind the inheritance. The explanation for why Marilyn Brown, a woman they had never met, had spent her final years making sure Linda, her distant relative, would inherit all of this. He pulled out one binder labeled Real Estate Holdings. Inside were notarized documents transferring ownership of several properties: apartments in Nashville, a condominium in Miami, and a ranch in West Texas. The names on initial signatures belonged to Kenny Rogers. Later, pages bore Marilyn's name. Cold numbness washed over him. He wasn't trained for this. Finances of this magnitude lived in worlds far beyond their reality. Linda found a binder labeled simply to Linda Robinson. It was thin, the smallest file of all. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter, folded neatly with her name written across the top in handwriting she recognized from the envelope upstairs. She pressed her palm flat on the table before reading, grounding herself so her hands wouldn't tremble the paper too badly. The family gathered around in silence as she opened the letter. "My dear Linda, if you are reading this, then you have already stepped into my past and into your future. I know this must feel overwhelming. I know you must have questions. You deserve answers. You deserve the truth. You and I are blood, not close in generation, but close in meaning. Your mother's grandmother was my sister. We lost touch after family disagreements that seem so small now. I spent my whole life working for a man who trusted me, a man who rewarded loyalty, and who made me a partner in his fortune, not a servant. But what good is fortune without someone to give it meaning? I was alone near the end. No children, no husband, no legacy, except you. This estate, this vault, this history, it is yours now. But please understand, not everyone will be happy about that. People will come who feel entitled to this wealth, people who believe what was Kenny's is theirs by blood. They won't care about me, and they might not care about you. Money is a magnet for danger. Trust no one outside this room, not even those who arrive with official papers and friendly smiles. You must decide what to do next. Use this inheritance wisely, Linda. It is not just money, it is power. And power always draws envy. You will find more answers elsewhere in this vault. I left everything organized so you can see clearly how this came to be. And one more thing. Do not let them find the second vault. That is where true danger sleeps. Your family's future depends on it. With love that never had time to blossom in person, Marilyn Brown Linda lowered the letter slowly, her chest heaving as she tried to swallow the weight of it. The words "second vault" echoed through her thoughts like a warning bell in a dark corridor. They all exchanged bewildered, uneasy glances. "What second vault?" Jaden whispered, both terrified and irresistibly curious. Before Linda could attempt an answer, a soft click echoed from the far end of the chamber, like a lock turning from the other side of a wall. Everyone froze, and then they heard it. Footsteps above them, slow, deliberate, not the scurrying of raccoons or the shifting of an old house. Human. Eli whimpered, and Linda knelt, pulling him close. "It's okay," she murmured, though her face drained of color. David looked up at the ceiling as if he could see through it. He didn't speak, but Linda could read the fear in his eyes. Someone else was inside the mansion. Someone who didn't want them down here. A loud metallic scrape reverberated down the elevator shaft, as though something heavy was being dragged to block the exit further. "We need to find another way out," David whispered urgently. Linda nodded, swallowing her panic. "Everyone stays close. No wandering. No touching anything unless we say so." They began searching the walls for seams, buttons, panels, anything that might indicate another exit or hidden pathway. The vault was built like a bunker, secure, meant to protect treasure from theft, but that security now trapped them inside with no guarantee that the person above wouldn't come down eventually. Jaden ran his hand along the walls near the tapes again, hoping instinct or luck would guide him. Marie checked behind the storage shelves, trying not to imagine shadows lurking just beyond sight. David scanned the ceiling for ventilation ducts. Eli held tight to Linda's hand, occasionally glancing upward with tear-filled eyes. Then Linda saw something. Faint, but there, a small logo embossed into the corner of a wall panel, the same musical note symbol that had adorned the button upstairs. She reached out slowly and pressed the center of the symbol. For a moment, all lights went out. Total blackness swallowed them whole. A chorus of panicked breaths filled the room. Eli clutched Linda's shirt, trembling. Then a dim red glow illuminated the floor, forming a thin path of lights that led deeper into the vault, toward darkness the overhead lights hadn't reached before. The message was clear. Move forward. David took a step first, forcing bravery into his stride. "Stay close," he said, voice rough. "We're going to get out of here." Linda nodded, pushing aside her dread. She gathered the kids close, keeping them between her and David. With each step along the glowing path, the weight of the unknown grew heavier. The room seemed to expand, swallowing them deeper below the mansion. Behind them, another sound rose from the elevator shaft, louder this time. Not just footsteps, a laugh, low and humorless. Someone knew they were trapped. Someone was enjoying it. David tightened his fists, fury replacing his fear. No one threatened his family and walked away unscathed. Ahead, the red path led to a seamless metal door. No handle, no window, just a single fingerprint scanner blinking softly beside it. The screen displayed words that made Linda's breath catch. Authorized personnel, Marilyn Brown, access level Alpha. She stared at her own hand, then at the scanner. Marilyn had chosen her. That meant whatever recognition existed might include her. She placed her palm on the scanner. A beep sounded. Blue light traced her hand. Then, access granted. The door slid open. What lay beyond stole their breath, a room even larger than the vault they had just left. Shelves of black cases and velvet boxes glimmered under cool white lights. A long table in the center held rows of items: jewels, gold bullion, stock certificates, precious artifacts from tours and awards 15 million people had witnessed but never imagined being stored away here beneath a forgotten estate. This was wealth beyond their comprehension. But something was missing in this room that had been present everywhere else in the house. Marilyn's careful organization. This space felt rushed, as if someone had started to pack up and leave in a hurry. And then Linda saw it. Another letter addressed to her, pinned down with a small iron key. She reached for it with trembling fingers. Linda sang out a light gasp as she read the first line. "If you're here, then the danger has already found you." She forced her eyes to continue. There are people who will stop at nothing to seize what lies here. They believe they have a rightful claim. They will follow you. They will hunt you. But remember, this treasure is not the greatest gift. What I left for you in the second vault is far more powerful than any dollar amount. Use the key. Find the truth. And whatever you do, protect your children." The children watched their mother's face collapse into fear. "Mom?" Jaden asked, voice tense. Linda looked toward the end of the room. The red lights that had led them stopped abruptly. Beyond that point, darkness. She stepped forward, cautiously, until her foot struck something metal concealed under a loose tarp. David helped her pull it away, revealing the outline of a thick hatch recessed into the floor. Next to it, engraved in metal, "Second Vault, strictly confidential." Jaden whispered what they all felt. "Oh, God!" Suddenly, the lights flickered violently. The hum in the walls choked and sputtered. The vault trembled like something massive had struck the building above. Eli screamed. Marie grabbed Linda's hand again. Another laugh from above, louder, echoing down like an omen. David pulled everyone back from the hatch as dust rained from the ceiling. Linda grabbed the key with shaking fingers, clutching it against her chest. Whatever Marilyn wanted them to find in that lower vault might save them. But opening it now could unleash the very danger she warned them about. They had no way out, no safe path, no ally. And now someone was coming. The Robinson family stood frozen in a chamber built on secrets and gold, holding a key to a vault that could change everything. When the ceiling groaned again, as though under a crushing force, Linda whispered the truth that now terrified them all. "We're in the middle of something bigger than we ever imagined, and I think we've only just begun." The storm above the mansion broke not in rain, but in tension. Dust fell from the ceiling as something heavy scraped across the upper floors, and the muffled thud of footsteps became a steady, deliberate rhythm. Every beat of those steps echoed through the concrete walls of the vault, pulsing through the silence like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any of them. The Robinsons huddled close, surrounded by treasures they had never imagined existed, but none of it felt like fortune anymore. It felt like a trap made of gold. David's first instinct was protection. He pulled the children closer, scanning the corners of the vault for tools, anything they could use as a weapon. His eyes caught a rusted crowbar leaning against a wall, probably left behind by whoever maintained the place years ago. He gripped it tightly, its weight grounding him against the panic threatening to take hold. Linda, still clutching the key to the second vault, could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She replayed Marilyn's warning in her mind. "They will follow you, they will hunt you," and realized it was no metaphor. Someone had already found them. They weren't trespassers in an abandoned estate anymore. They were intruders in a war for something much larger than them. Somewhere above, someone else wanted what lay beneath their feet. A metallic clang made Eli scream. The sound came from the elevator shaft, a heavy chain snapping into place. Then silence again. The person above was sealing them in. The faint echo of laughter drifted down, distorted by the metal walls. It was deep, smug, confident, someone who thought they had already won. Jaden pressed himself against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. His young mind was racing, caught between terror and awe. "Why would anyone want to hurt us?" he whispered. David didn't answer. He didn't have one. He just looked at Linda, whose pale face told him she knew more than she was ready to say. The second vault. The true danger. Whatever Marilyn had hidden there, it wasn't just money. A shudder ran through the walls as the hum of electricity returned for a moment. The flickering lights cast sharp, uneven shadows across the vault. One of those shadows moved when none of them did. David swung around, crowbar raised. "Who's there?" His voice echoed, breaking the suffocating quiet. For a heartbeat, there was no reply. Then a man's voice, faint but steady, came through a small intercom grill near the far wall. "David Robinson," it said. "I'm not here to hurt you, but I can't let you walk away with what isn't yours." The voice was calm, too calm. Linda stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Who are you? How do you know our names?" The speaker crackled. "Names are easy when you've spent months watching. You and your wife came here by mistake. That house doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the Rogers family, and you're standing in what rightfully should have been ours." "Then why didn't they leave it to you?" David shot back. A pause, then a small chuckle. "Because Marilyn Brown made sure we couldn't. She buried the proof along with the fortune, but I know it's here. You just happened to arrive before I did." David clenched his jaw. "We didn't ask for any of this." "I'm sure you didn't," the man said softly. "But you've got something I need. A key, I believe. If you hand it over, you might walk out of here alive." Eli whimpered, pressing into Linda's side. She tightened her grip on him. The man's tone made it clear he wasn't bluffing. He knew about the key, the one in her pocket, the one Marilyn had left pinned to the letter. The realization turned her blood cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but her voice betrayed her. The intercom clicked off. The lights went out again. Darkness swallowed them. Then came the sound of grinding metal, the elevator moving. Someone was coming down. David pulled his family back toward the far wall. "Stay behind me," he whispered. He lifted the crowbar like a sword, his knuckles white. Linda crouched beside the kids, heart hammering. She could hear every second of the elevator's descent. The slow, measured creak, the groan of gears, the faint buzz of electricity struggling to revive systems long dormant. When the elevator finally stopped, the door opened with a hiss. A flashlight beam cut through the dark. Its glare found them instantly. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a dark suit that looked out of place in the dust and decay. He held a pistol low in one hand, casual but confident. His face was clean-shaven, hard, the kind of face used to giving orders and seeing them followed. Behind him, a second figure appeared, a woman, younger, holding another flashlight and a bag slung across her shoulder. "Well," the man said, his voice smooth, "I suppose introductions are in order. My name's Larry Thompson. I represent a very old interest in this estate." He looked around the room, his flashlight sliding over gold bars, old manuscripts, framed gold records, and finally, the family. "You did well finding this place. I didn't think anyone outside of Maryland's circle knew how to access the elevator." "You've been following us," David said. It wasn't a question. Larry's smirk deepened. "You make it sound rude. I prefer to think of it as careful observation. Marilyn's will was sealed, but word of your inheritance got out. My clients have a claim to certain assets, and unfortunately for you, that includes what's behind that hatch." His eyes flicked to the second vault. "I see you've already found it." Linda stood up slowly, her trembling hand gripping the key in her pocket so tightly the edge bit into her palm. "You're not getting it," she said quietly. Larry sighed as if disappointed by a predictable answer. "Mrs. Robinson, you're a mother. Think rationally. That vault doesn't just hold money. It holds evidence, records of transactions, private writings, agreements Kenny Rogers never made public, things that could destroy reputations. People will pay to keep it buried. That's what this is really about." Then you don't want the inheritance, Linda said. You want to cover up what's inside. Larry shrugged. Call it balance. Some truths aren't meant to be unearthed. He nodded toward the woman beside him. Emma, please. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small device, a scanner, and began moving toward the vault door. The Robinsons instinctively backed away, but Larry raised the gun slightly, not pointing it directly yet, just reminding them of control. David's mind raced. The crowbar in his hand felt pathetic against a gun, but his instincts screamed not to back down. He needed a distraction, something to buy time. His eyes darted toward Jaden, who was standing closest to the control panel that had revealed the secret passage earlier. If Jaden could find the button again— "Mom," Jaden whispered without turning his head. "The lights." Linda caught his meaning immediately. She nodded ever so slightly. Emma crouched beside the vault's keypad. Her scanner beeped softly as it synchronized with the security panel. "This system is ancient," she muttered, "but it's still got some juice." Larry smirked. "That's the beauty of old money. It never dies." The scanner beeped again, louder this time, signaling partial success. Jaden pressed the button. Every light in the room exploded to full brightness before shorting out. The sudden burst blinded everyone for half a second. David lunged forward, swinging the crowbar toward Larry's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor, sliding across the concrete. Emma screamed, fumbling for her bag. "Run!" David shouted. Jaden grabbed Marie's hand, dragging her toward the far corner. Linda scooped Eli up and stumbled after them. The family raced into the darkness beyond the vault's edge, following the faint red emergency lights that had reappeared along the floor. Larry's furious shout echoed behind them. "Find them!" Gunfire cracked once, deafening in the enclosed space, but the bullet hit metal, not flesh. They turned sharply into a side passage, deeper into the underbelly of the vault complex. The air grew colder. Pipes lined the ceiling above them. They ran until their legs burned and lungs screamed for air. Finally, David stopped, leaning against a wall, breathing hard. "We have to get out of this place." Linda nodded, clutching the key. "There has to be another exit. Marilyn wouldn't trap herself down here." Jaden looked back, the adrenaline trembling through his hands. "We can't go back. He'll kill us." "We won't go back," David said firmly. "We go forward." They followed the corridor deeper, turning corners blindly, guided only by the flicker of dying lights. Then, at the end of one long hallway, they found a door marked Maintenance Access, Emergency Use Only. David tried the handle. It was stiff, but not locked. He forced it open. Inside was a narrow stairwell spiraling upward into darkness. As they began to climb, a voice echoed faintly behind them. "You can't hide down here forever." Larry's taunt followed them like a curse. But step by step, they ascended toward faint hope. The stairs were endless, twisting upward through the mansion's forgotten infrastructure. At one landing, they found a rusted sign, Sub-Level 2. They hadn't even realized how far below ground they had been. When they finally reached the top, they emerged behind a false panel in the library upstairs. The scent of old wood and paper replaced the metallic tang of the vault. For a moment, they just breathed. Alive, free, shaken, but together. Linda looked at the key still in her hand. It glinted under the weak light filtering through a cracked window. She knew they hadn't escaped for good. Larry would come back. He wouldn't stop until he had the vault, and whatever secrets were buried inside. David touched her shoulder. "We can't stay here." "No," she said quietly, "but we can't leave empty-handed either." They turned toward the dark corridor beyond the library doors. Somewhere below their feet lay a fortune, and a truth powerful enough to destroy lives. The Robinsons hadn't asked for any of it, but it was theirs now, tangled with danger and destiny. And as thunder rolled outside, Linda knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. For Marilyn, for their family, for whatever truth had been buried in the heart of Kenny Rogers' empire. The storm was no longer outside. It had found its way in. The library was silent except for the thunder outside and the ragged breathing of the 5 people huddled inside it. Dust floated through thin beams of daylight breaking in through the cracked windows. Every muscle in David's body remained tight, prepared to fight again if he needed to. But for the first time since the elevator began its descent, the family finally had a moment to think. A brief, fragile pause. Linda half expected the walls to shift or more footsteps to thunder above them, but the mansion had gone still, as if even the house were holding its breath. She leaned against a sturdy wooden desk, squeezing the key in her hand until its metal edges left marks in her skin. Her gaze rested on her children, eyes wide and frightened, clothes covered in dust from the vault, hands still trembling. Jaden's youthful bravado had cracked. Marie's lower lip quivered whenever she let her breath out too fast. Eli curled into her lap, clinging to her like a kitten startled by thunder. David stood guard near the only exit, crowbar prepared, listening for any sign that Larry and Emma had found the hidden panel. The silence pressed in. Linda spoke first, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't run anymore." She forced her fear down beneath her ribs, hiding it so her children would not see just how terrified she truly was. Marilyn trusted us with something important. We owe her more than fear. David turned his eyes toward her. He knew exactly what she was thinking. The second vault. That hatch marked in steel and warning. That vault containing a truth powerful enough to get someone killed, or save a family. "It's too dangerous," he whispered back. "We almost died down there. We might not get a second chance." "We won't," she replied. "That's why we have to finish this now." Jaden stepped forward, wiping his palms against his jeans. "Mom's right," he said, though his voice cracked on the first word. "If we run, Larry wins. He takes everything. Marilyn's trust, the music, the—" He faltered, searching for words bigger than he understood. The meaning of why we're here. David's resistance weakened. He looked at his son, seeing not a boy but a young man growing in the middle of disaster. Pride swelled inside him, mixed with fear that he wasn't strong enough to keep his son safe. "There's a difference between bravery and recklessness," he murmured. Jaden didn't argue. He simply nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. Linda stepped to David's side and gently placed her hand against his cheek. "Our lives changed the moment we opened that letter," she whispered. "We didn't ask for this, but running won't undo it. Larry will chase us forever. He'll hurt whoever he has to, just to silence this truth." David exhaled slowly. He couldn't protect them by hiding. He could only protect them by confronting the danger head on. Finally, he nodded once. "We finish it," he said, "together." They gathered themselves, dusty, shaken, but unwilling to surrender. The house groaned softly as though it understood the decision. As they slipped from the library into the hallway, the chandelier above swayed slightly, stirred by air from the old ventilation system, or by something unseen moving through the mansion. The corridors felt narrower now, shadows stretching toward them from broken doorways. The torch-like beam from a single flashlight they'd grabbed downstairs sliced through the darkness. The children held hands, moving as one. With every step, the mansion seemed to guide them back toward the studio door, the place where the secret first revealed itself, where the music never rested. Before they reached the room, Linda paused, sensing something she could not name. "Wait," she breathed. David stopped instantly. All fell silent. Then they heard it. Voices from deeper inside the mansion, Larry and Emma, hunting them. "We have to move now," David urged, the urgency sharpening his voice. They slipped into the recording studio and shut the door quietly behind them. Linda rushed to the button hidden beneath the soundproofing fabric. The elevator roared back to life, and the wall began to slide open once more, but David held up his hand. "No," he said. "They'll expect that." His focus shifted to the far side of the studio, a second door, once unnoticed in their panic. It was disguised, painted the same color as the acoustic panels. The handle was cold in his palm as he pulled it open. Beyond lay a narrow maintenance catwalk leading into darkness. "It has to connect to the lower levels," Linda said. "Let's go." They hurried down the walkway, the sound of their footsteps muffled by carpeting worn thin from years of use. The hum of machinery grew louder as the corridor dipped downward slightly. Soon, the walls turned from padded fabric to bare concrete. The air became colder, thinner. Jaden held the flashlight ahead. The metal grated floor beneath them rattled with every step. Somewhere above, a door slammed. Larry's voice boomed through the halls of the house, distorted but unmistakable. "They're still here. Find them." Eli whimpered but stayed quiet. Linda whispered soothing words into his hair even as her own fear threatened to shatter her calm. At the end of the catwalk, a metal ladder descended steeply. David climbed first, gripping the rungs tightly, crowbar hooked in his belt. The ladder led directly into a large mechanical passage, pipes and wires twisting along the ceiling like veins of a metal beast. Jaden brought up the rear, flashlight shaken in his grip. The tunnel finally ended at an enormous industrial bulkhead door, a circular hatch with a rusted wheel lock in the center. Faded letters stenciled across the metal spelled out, "Vault Access B, authorized only." "The second vault," Linda whispered. David set his jaw and heaved at the wheel. It screamed in protest, rust grinding against rust, but it slowly began to turn. He used his shoulder for leverage, straining with every ounce of strength he had left. With a final groan in protest, the hatch released. The door swung inward. They stepped into a chamber unlike anything else in the estate, clean, brightly lit by backup power, every surface glinting with polished steel. This room hadn't tasted dust or neglect. It was preserved, protected. Along the far wall sat a long fireproof cabinet with biometric locks. A glass display case sat in the center of the room, empty, as though something had once been there, or was never meant to be placed. But on the cabinet, an envelope awaited them as though Marilyn had known exactly when they would arrive. Linda stepped forward and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a final message. "To my family, by blood and destiny. If you're reading this, then you have claimed the courage required to face what others fear. This vault contains something more valuable than money, the truth. Inside this cabinet are documents, recordings, and testimonies that reveal decisions made in the shadows, affairs covered and crimes concealed. The public saw the music. I saw the man, And I knew that if the world ever learned everything buried in these walls, lives would shatter. But I also believed those responsible should be held accountable. I built this vault to ensure that if something ever happened to me, justice would survive. This key you carry unlocks not only this vault, but the future. You choose its use. Wealth can save you. Truth can save others. Both can destroy. You must decide who you want to be. With love and trust, Marilyn Brown. Linda lowered the letter slowly. Tears welled in her eyes. Not of fear this time, but of something deeper. Responsibility. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a legacy, a burden, a chance to break a cycle of power that had gone unchallenged for too long. Behind her, a voice filled the doorway. "That key belongs to me." Larry stepped inside, weapon raised. His expression was fury carved into flesh. Emma followed close behind, clutching a small device. David instinctively pushed the children behind him. "Don't come closer," he warned, crowbar ready. Larry scoffed. "You think you can protect them? The second vault is worth more than your lives. Hand over the key." Emma took a step forward, eyes hard but anxious. "We don't want to hurt the kids. Just give us the key and walk away." "You'll kill us anyway," Jaden snapped, surprising everyone with the tremorless clarity in his voice. "You shot at us before. You blocked us in. You laughed about it." Larry's jaw ticked. The truth exposed made him colder. "You don't know what forces you're dealing with. That vault contains evidence that could destroy reputations worth billions. If you think they'll allow you to walk away..." Linda stepped out from behind David. "You think I'm afraid of powerful men?" Her voice shook with fire. "I've already survived the kind of life where every day tries to destroy you. You don't get to take this from me. You don't get to decide my family's fate." She reached into her pocket. Larry raised his gun, finger tensed on the trigger. One wrong move and everything would end in blood. But Linda didn't falter. She threw the key, not to Larry, to David. In the split second of Larry's confusion, David swung the crowbar with every ounce of strength stored from a lifetime of hard labor. It connected with Larry's arm in a sickening crack. The gun fired. The bullet dug into the ceiling, sending sparks raining down. Emma screamed, reaching for her bag to draw something else out. But Marie lunged forward, grabbing Emma's arm with a desperate cry, pulling the device from her grasp. It clattered across the floor. Jaden shoved Emma backward with all his weight. She stumbled into the vault doorframe, gasping in pain. Larry, unarmed and furious, lunged for David, but David swung again. Larry collapsed, groaning, one arm limp. The room fell still. Heavy breathing filled the air. For a moment, nobody moved. Not until Linda took David's hand in hers, grounding him, telling his adrenaline-soaked body the danger had passed. Larry lay defeated on the floor. Emma slid down beside him, clutching her ribs, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them threatened again. Linda looked at her children. Dirty, terrified, but alive. They had been pushed into darkness and had climbed out stronger. The key lay near David's shoe. He picked it up carefully, then placed it into Linda's hand. "What now?" he asked. Linda lifted her chin, eyes shining with steely resolve. "Now," she said, voice steady, "we protect Marilyn's truth. We rebuild this house. We reclaim our lives. And we make sure the world knows that what was hidden in darkness belongs to the light." David smiled, the first real smile since their journey began. The children crowded close, wrapping their arms around their parents in a tangle of trembling relief. Outside, the storm cleared. Sunlight filtered through the cracks of the old house, brightening the dust in the air like sparks of gold. The Robinsons walked back toward the surface together. The mansion felt different now, not terrifying but full of purpose, waiting to be reborn, waiting to become a home. 2 days later, after turning Larry and Emma over to the authorities and providing enough evidence to expose their scheme, the Robinsons stood on the front porch of their new estate. Reporters would come. Legal battles would follow. But fear was no longer the ruling force in their lives. Construction crews arrived. Lawyers, financial planners, trustworthy allies, people who wanted to help rather than take. The community, once wary of newcomers, began to greet them with cautious smiles and curiosity. Word spread that a broken mansion was being restored, not just structurally, but morally. The recording studio, once a tomb of silence, thrummed again with new life. Jaden sat behind the mixing console, headphones on, guitar plugged in, recording the first song of what could finally be a future. Marie walked the halls with a notebook under her arm, designing what would one day become a music education center. Eli played on the grand staircase, laughing. Childhood returned to him. In the evenings, Linda and David would sit together in the renovated parlor, drinking tea, marveling at the impossible path that had led them here. Gratitude replaced fear. Possibility replaced hunger. The house that once protected silence now promised to share music again. And each night, before she slept, Linda would whisper a quiet thank you to Marilyn, not just for the inheritance, but for the courage she had awakened in them. The mansion's walls, once hollow with secrets, now echoed with love and laughter. The Robinsons had not just survived, they had risen. A family, once crushed by life, now stood among treasures earned not by chance, but by unstoppable hope. Their future, finally, was paid in full. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Drop a comment, share this story with a friend, and keep watching. Another unbelievable video is waiting for you right now. Your support keeps these stories alive.